We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back talking liberty with Scott D. Cosenza. Earlier in the show, we discussed Trump's legal travails and what that means for him as both a candidate and a potential future president. But now I'd like to discuss the ins and outs of what this trial, should it come to trial, actually look like. Now, Scott, I believe because this is being held at the Miami Federal Courthouse, that the jury pool has to be drawn from Southern Florida. So that's Miami-Dade, Broward, places like that, right?
Yeah, so the federal judicial system divides into districts, and where those are geographically depends on where charges should be filed. There was some discussion about whether charges would be filed against Trump in D.C. or in Florida, but they have been filed in Florida, and that's where the jury pool will come from. I think there's like 6 or 7 counties Miami and South and a little bit north of there, where all the people will be.
Well, let's jump on that very, very quickly, Scott. You say there was talk about it possibly being held in Washington, D.C., the trial being held in Washington, D.C. And I can kind of see the argument for why that would be, for both the honest reasons and the dishonest reasons. The honest reasons being, well, the White House, and presumably where Donald Trump got the documents in the first place, is in Washington, D.C. The dishonest reason being that the prosecutors might be hoping for a jury that is essentially a Washington, D.C. jury, rabidly anti-Trump, and willing to convict him regardless of what is exposed in the court.
First the verdict,
so what?
Then the trial for those jurors, right?
Yeah, then the trial. Yeah, verdict, then the trial. So why would this be filed in Florida, of all places?
Well, the policy of the Department of Justice, as it should be, is to file charges where crimes occur. So if somebody's murdered in Wisconsin, then the charges are going to be filed in Wisconsin. And Donald Trump allegedly committed most of these crimes at Mar-a-Lago and in Palm Beach. And so it's appropriate to lodge those charges in Florida, which he caught a lucky break. I mean, just the assignment of this judge alone, that's a break. And that, the jurors will be less likely to be never Trumpers or suffer from Trump derangement syndrome and give him a fair shake. Now, I will say this, Mark, before you put a pin in your question there, just I want to get it on the record. I don't think we're going to see a trial in this case before the election. Better legal minds than I, namely Jonathan Turley, have suggested that Trump's best option is to delay. And given the possibility of interlocutory appeals, I think we will see significant delays in the case. And what that means is most cases have issues for appeal, and those appeals are heard after the conclusion of the case. So you get a conviction, the defense thinks it's unfair, thinks that certain rules were violated, and they may be entitled either to a reversal or a new trial. They appeal, they go to the appellate court, and so on and so forth. Maybe it gets past that to the Supreme Court, and who knows what. But there's another type of appeal, which is much more rare, which is the interlocutory appeal, which is you say to the judge in the current case, hey, this issue that you've ruled on, I don't think you've ruled correctly, or it's a novel issue. Let's take it to the appeals court and wait a while on this proceeding until we hear from them. And then it's up to the appeals court to say whether they will take it or not, or grant a stay in the lower court proceedings. Because of the stakes and the nature of the prosecution, I expect we're going to see some opportunity for the defense to delay the proceedings with that type of legal maneuver. So I just wanted to sort of put that out there. I think the smart money bet is if they're motivated to stretch it as long as they can, they will be able to get it so that any trial will be past the election.
So let's make an assumption that Donald Trump doesn't win, first he's the nominee, and secondly, he doesn't win. At some point, it will go to trial, though, right? Unless
he pleads, which I imagine so if I was advising Mr. Trump, my advice would be run for president and win, and then pardon yourself and cancel the prosecution. If you can't do that, making a deal for no prison time seems like it would be his best move, given if the quality of the evidence is as the indictment suggests, and it may not be. It's certainly within the possibility of the Justice Department to play fast and loose. Although It has the ring of authenticity, I will say. When I read the indictment, it doesn't look like flim flam. It looks like they have the goods.
Okay, so let's talk about what, obviously, we don't know what could or would or wouldn't or shouldn't happen with an actual trial, but we do know that so the two lines of defense that are most likely, not including run for president, win and pardon yourself, although that is a fantastic defense, and it's certainly one I'm going to use if I'm ever facing legal trouble.
They don't teach it in law school, Mark, because so few defendants have that
Crazy,
as
right?
a practical option. But maybe they'll add it now.
You never know. So one is to delay for this purpose. Number two is to get a jury that has at least some sympathy with Donald Trump. Now, we talked that this is in South Florida, so Broward County, Palm Beach, Miami-Dade being the most populous county in Florida. And so the jury will be selected, the jury and the provisionals, are they called? The extras? Right. They'll all be pulled from this area. And now, if we look at Miami-Dade, for example, in 2016, Miami-Dade went for Hillary Clinton by 30 points. This was a very anti-Trump area. And then in 2020, Joe Biden won Miami-Dade. That's true. But the gap was just down to 6 points in the difference there. And then in 2022, you had this Republican surge brought on, I guess, by Ron DeSantis' performance in Florida in the 4 years he was governor originally. And for his second term, he took essentially what was like a 20-point turnaround from his 2008 to 2020, which suggests to me that Miami-Dade isn't quite the seething blue bastion that it once was. Now, it's still fairly heavily Democrat, I believe, but Donald Trump has more chance of getting at least one sympathetic juror now than he would have done, let's say, in 2016, doesn't he?
So one of the things you said I would just take a small issue with,
Sure.
which was that you said in 2016 that the voters were anti-Trump because of the polling results. And I would just take a quibble with that and say that I think, as I look at them, they're just more pro-Democrat during that election cycle, rather than exhibiting a particular anti-Trump sentiment, which I think is important for our discussion here.
I would agree. Yeah.
I don't see an anti-Trump vibe or, general consensus or mood coming from that area. And he does have a better chance now because of there's seemingly less, knee-jerk affiliation or sort of tribal team. We're on team this and team that. So look, if you were going to get any district or any place in the United States where you'd want to have this case tried, South Florida would not be, at the bottom of the list. I don't know that it would be at the very top.
Well, what about North Florida, South Alabama?
Well, North Florida actually might be better. I haven't looked at those tabs, but I would guess they might have some different population than the South Florida.
And I am right.
Democrat versus Republican.
I am right in thinking here, Arnie, that being a federal criminal trial, that it's a unanimous verdict. So that would be all 12 people have to agree.
Sadly, Mark, some states allow non-unanimous verdicts in criminal trials, which I think is anathema to the system that was created to ensure that people can't be put in a cage unless their fellow citizens agree. But thankfully, it's one of the protections we still have in the federal system of the unanimous jury verdict. That's right. One person who believes that Donald Trump should not be convicted can vote no, and it is appropriate. I will add this point. It's legal now. Judges can restrict this in their own courtrooms, but it is perfectly legal for an attorney to ask a jury to vote not guilty, not because of the facts and evidence, but because the law or the prosecution itself is unjust. This is permissible, very rarely done, but it's done sort of covertly and sort of in at an oblique angle in some drug cases. You'll see this, something like, are we really going to send this person? Well, this can be also attacked directly. And I would suspect that might be something that the Trump might want to go for, especially if the facts as revealed in court, show that this is good evidence of his, violation of this law.
Well, we'll see how it all plays out. And Scott DiCosenza will be covering pretty much all of this on the pages of libertynation.com. Scott, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mark.
And that's almost all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'd like to thank our guests on today's show, longtime host of LN Radio and Liberty Nation's senior political analyst, Mr. Tim Donner, and LN's legal affairs editor and host of the excellent Uprising podcast, Mr. Scott DiCosenza, Esquire. And of course, I want to extend my thanks to you, the listeners, for taking the time to tune in. Now, a final thought to leave you with this week. There's a fantastic quote by Francis Bacon that goes, quote, "If a man will begin with certainties, he shall end in doubts. But if he will be content to begin with doubts, he shall end in certainties." End quote. Now, perhaps sometimes we're all a little too certain in our beliefs. And there are some who are often far too certain for their own good and for the good of others. They don't believe in free thinking, let alone free speech. They demand that your view is an echo of their own, lest you be deemed a fundamental threat to their own fundamentalist ideology. It is only through clear and free thinking that we ultimately prevail upon the truth. And perhaps that's why some are so opposed to it. Thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.